second versus first at the top of the Liga. Just 2 points separate these Spanish giants going into the clash. Not ideal preparation, though, of course, for Real Madrid going into the game, coming off the back of that defeat against Manchester City at home. Panic at the White House is the front page of Sport. I want to welcome in Sid Lowe to the show. Sid, how much does that headline ring true to actually how Real Madrid are feeling going into this game?
Well, look, Sport is a pro-Barcelona sports daily. The other big pro-Barcelona sports daily is El Mundo Deportivo, who today went with almost exactly the same headline. They went with white panic. And, of course, in part, this is wishful thinking from their point of view. But it's also about the response to the defeat against Manchester City, the fact that Real Madrid have dropped 5 points over the last 2 weeks in La Liga, and that sense that there is tension building. Not least, of course, because people remember what happened last year when Barcelona went to Real Madrid and beat them twice, knocked them out of the Copa del Rey, knocked them out of the league title race, and they were beaten by Ajax. All of that in the space of 8 days. And so there is this sense that, hang on, it's happening again. Zidane said last week, after the game against Levante, next week our entire season is at stake. Of course, that meant 2 games, City and Barcelona. They've already lost the City one, and now comes Barcelona. And it's that City defeat, I think, that has shifted the, if you like, the emotional balance going into this game. Where has the finger of blame been pointed, Sid, after that defeat, and how is that going to change things going into the weekend? Well, as I say, I mean, look, even on Monday, before that game, one of the headlines in one of the Madrid papers was talking about a psychosis, this sense of fear that the same thing as last year would happen again. And you thought, well, that's really exaggerated. But, of course, by Thursday morning, at which point they had been beaten by Man City, it didn't feel quite like that. Now, there's a finger of blame pointed at Zidane, not least, of course, the decision to leave out Toni Kroos. I think there's been a sense that they allow themselves to collapse in the last 10 or 15 minutes. But I think the broader analysis, and obviously there's been some questions about the referee just because there always are, I think the broader analysis, though, has looked at this and thought, actually, City were probably the better side for maybe 70, 75 minutes of this game. And that has brought to the surface those doubts that are much deeper lying at Real Madrid about whether they're scoring enough goals, whether that defensive solidity we saw as recently as 2 or 3 weeks ago was actually based on something that perhaps wasn't as tangible as we wanted to believe, and that maybe Real Madrid are just not quite that good. Now, of course, the context of this, Dan, is that things aren't great at Barcelona either. Yeah, that's interesting, boys, isn't it? It's not the Clasico that has been a few years ago. We had 2 real top teams going head-to-head.
It's amazing how things change, though, isn't it? Because the whole thing at the Nou Camp was burning. You could smell the smoke like a month ago, and now the worm has turned. It seems like it's... I know there's still issues at Barcelona, I understand that, but it seems the pressure has shifted somewhat. To go back to the game in midweek, I think the bigger concern, and Sid touched on it, was the fact that even City, who kind of never really got out of second gear for a lot of the game, but whilst they had their foot on the neck of Real Madrid, really could have finished them off. I mean, 1 header in the first half from Benzema was all they could muster. I know it got a little better for them after they scored, and City were under pressure for a bit, but then they took hold again. And I just feel they're not able to control the game like they once did. I mean, I suppose it was a Kroos or Modric thing during the week, because obviously the Casemiro, Modric and Kroos, there's not enough legs in there anymore, so young Valverde plays. And that's a big decision for him at the weekend. What does he do? Because he needs to try and get control of that middle of the park. That's what they did so well when they were very successful. What is he likely to do, Sid, regarding that 11?
That's a very good question, because Zidane does have a habit of surprising us. And, you know, of course, you look at the midweek game and the inclusion of Vinicius. Maybe we saw that coming, but nobody saw the lack of Kroos being a probability. And so I think what he will probably try and do is reinforce the midfield. Looking at that lineup there on the screen, I think you would say that's perfectly plausible. It's also plausible that instead of Vinicius, it's Isco that goes in there to try and create what Craig was talking about, that control in midfield, the number of bodies in there, the players who can keep hold of the ball, which was what was so surprising about the absence of Kroos, because while it's true there are other good footballers in the team, he's the one that judges the pace of the game at best, that maybe doesn't kind of stand out, doesn't do really dramatic things, but gives them that degree of control that they lacked. And I think there are some very significant doubts. That's a perfectly plausible lineup. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we saw a variation which might be Isco instead of Vinicius, though.
Does that work for you, Stevie? Adding an extra man in midfield?
Absolutely. I think that's a smart move. It's, you know, Sid was talking about, they said there's 2 games for the season and one's gone and they've lost it. They can't afford to just go gung-ho to the wind and open up. So